College is one of the most defining seasons of life. It's where big questions tend to surface, right? Who am I? What do I believe? What difference will my life make? And for Christian students, those questions don't get easier in a culture that often pushes faith to the margins. And that's why leaders like Connor Champion matter. As the founder and president of Austin Christian University, Connor is not just running an institution. He's really shepherding a generation, which we're going to find out today. And we're going to talk about what drew Connor into Christian higher education, the challenges that he sees in this cultural moment, and how he believes the next generation can be equipped to live faithfully in a world that seems to be getting more and more controversial. I'm Taryn Abella, and this is Clarity in Controversy. Welcome, Connor. Thanks for joining us.
Thank you, Tanner. Excited to be here.
We had spoken before recording, and I had talked about, this podcast is all about gaining clarity in moments and topics of controversy and challenge. And I would think you would agree that nothing seems to be more challenging in this moment than higher education. A lot of people have opinions about it and worldviews, and I'm really fascinated by your story. As I understand it, and obviously I'd love for you to share, you found yourself in the coaching world, never wanted to be in ministry, and 2 years ago you end up in ministry, launching a Christian university that focuses on this niche of entrepreneurship and technology, and it becomes launched out of a church. And that is a very unique model. It's not one that I have ever heard of. And so before we dive into kind of some of the specific issues, I really want to hear from you, Connor, on what drew you personally into higher education, and specifically Christian higher education.
Yeah, I think I've always, believe it or not, had almost a hate for higher ed, and that's coming from somebody who's leading a school.
Yeah.
It's a little out of whack, but I think that I've always had strong feelings whenever it came to my educational journey.
Hmm.
I wasn't necessarily a 4.0, but I was incredibly driven, and I was a learner, and I just ate up books nonstop, and I would sit in lectures and just wish that I was reading more relevant information. And so I think out of that disdain, like, there's almost been a birthing of a lot of different ideas that have all culminated, and so yeah, I don't know if I would have ever seen myself doing this. Um, never would have imagined. But I think out of the coaching world, you just start to fall in love with the students that you're maximizing. I mean, they're all college athletes, they're student athletes. And so, really, as a coach, your job is to maximize the potential of the players that you're in front of every single day. And so, that really became my life mission. It's basically, how do I maximize the people that are right in front of me, specifically in football? And so you just fall in love with the craft. Like, I fell in love with the craft of coaching, and so much of coaching is teaching. Uh, Great coach Bill Walsh talks about coaching is teaching. And so if you fall in love with teaching, the X's and O's, how do you maximize that? So I fell in love with a lot of educators who talked about neuroscience and talked about how to maximize the brain in the classroom. And so that was a small part of my coaching job, but it's recruiting, it's developing, it's the classroom, it's the hands-on learning. It's really everything that I get to do now. And I just probably didn't see it coming this way.
Yeah,
But I feel like I'm coaching every single day.
that's great. So how did you get to the moment where you're in coaching, and all of a sudden you find yourself in a moment where it's transitioning to a ministry from the church that is launching a university in Texas?
Yeah, so I never thought I'd leave coaching. I thought coaching was my ministry, and I had a couple moments. So I'm a pastor's kid, and so it just felt like that was the thing that every PK kind of did, honestly. Like, go work for your parents, and it was a little bit of a cop out in my frame, and that's not necessarily the right frame. I think people are certainly called to it. Um, the next generation of pastors' kids, and my younger brother has always been full-time ministry. But for me, I was 8 years old whenever I got my first coaching book. I was 14 years old whenever I started going to coaches conventions. I was a freshman in high school whenever I started coaching. So I wasn't playing. I was obsessed with the craft of coaching. And literally, just my whole life revolved around how do I become a college football head coach one day.
Hmm.
And at these coaches conventions, just started introducing myself, started handing out a resume that probably didn't have anything of relevance on it. And people just started to say, like, who's this guy that's showing up to these coaches conventions, by himself at 14 years old? And I was that guy. I was that kind of nerdy football geek, and had great opportunities. Got to coach with Dak Prescott at Mississippi State, coached at Houston, coached at Arizona State with Jaden Daniels.
Wow.
Just kind of went around on this coaching gauntlet, and we had moved out here to essentially be a part of a job with Baylor, and my wife and I were praying through just a time of prayer and fasting, and we were like, I don't know exactly why we're here. There's other opportunities. Why are we in Texas, an hour away from where I grew up, which
Hmm.
was cool. And in that time of prayer and fasting, we just felt called to ministry. So I brought it to Pastor Joe, my father, and I just said, hey, feeling called to ministry. I don't like it. It doesn't feel like something that is in my way of thinking. But he was like, Connor, if you're called to it, you're outside of the will if you don't step into it. And
Yeah.
so that was, and I knew it was probably something related to developing people. I knew
Hmm.
that we had a school. I knew HR was something that came to mind. I love recruiting. I love developing. Like, how do we maximize this? But really, this vision of a school has been around for 20 years. I've heard about this vision, and they had just had an opening for who's going to lead this school into the next 25 years. We
Hmm.
had just hit 25 years as a church. Who's going to lead the school for the next couple decades? And they had been thinking about me for it, and they didn't bring it up because I was in coaching. And this is weeks before they talked about it with the board, and they just said, if we could pick anybody, it'd be Connor.
Wow.
And I don't say that from a standpoint of I'm not the guy that you would pick to lead a school. I'm not. Like, ask any one of my teachers growing up. Uh, but they felt strongly about it and stepped into it, and you just start dreaming of what's possible. And you just start kind of blowing the lid off of any preconceived notion of what a school looks like coming out of a church.
Yeah, and I have been in higher education quite some time. I went to UC Davis in California, and then got my master's at Liberty. Very contrasting schools, and now I find myself as a PhD candidate. And so I've spent quite a bit of time in higher education, and I see the challenges and the frustrations. What stands out to me is the uniqueness of your school. It seems very in opposition in a good way on what higher education looks like. Talk to me about what Austin Christian University is, what you guys center on, and really what sets you guys apart from the rest of the space in higher education.
Yeah, I think it's a totally new lane in a lot of ways, and I don't think that was intentional. I don't think that we set into it to be disruptive, but I think that everything that we've done, whenever you kind of stack it up, is just very disruptive as a whole.
Yeah.
And so, really, whenever you think about each component, we're going into it eyes wide open. The team that we built with is a lot of entrepreneurs. It's a lot
Mm,
of business people,
yeah.
and so we didn't have a university background that said this is the way that things should be done. We just kind of went case by case, just said, how would we maximize the student in this environment? And so you look at who has developed leaders better than anybody in a higher ed standpoint. Well, you have West Point. So how does West Point develop leaders? Well, it's peer to peer.
Mm,
That was something that we held on to. You look at Chick-fil-A and you go, they've developed culture better than anybody else in across all industries. how do they make a 16-year-old treat customers with a Ritz-Carlton experience?
Hmm.
So you meet with Ritz-Carlton or you meet with Chick-fil-A and you go, let's create a culture that gives this to an 18, 19-year-old. Um, Classroom space, same thing. How do you maximize the classroom? Well, it's not an hour and a half lecture. It's people are learning in short bits. So how do we break up a class in a way that's easily retained? So you do that over everything in a university setting. It's a lot of stuff.
Yeah.
So, but it's all intentional about developing the student. So, how we would describe it is it's very niche in our offering, but it's hyper personalized experiential education. So everything is about how do we maximize the student. And I think what's happening in the AI space, there's tools that we can use, not replacing what humans do best, and that's personal connection. That's that is the hyper personal part, but the hyper part is we're the first AI native university in America. We would be fools to not utilize that as a
Yeah.
tool to be able to run with speed in a way that other schools don't have the capacity to do. So, school of 70,000 people isn't turning that ship very fast. We're on the ground floor of it, and now it's a tool that we'll use school wide. So,
Yeah.
I think
That's
it's just
amazing.
I think it's how do we maximize each individual within the organization?
Yeah, and I know you guys aren't just about measuring success in terms of student outcomes or numbers. How do you measure, and how have you seen success in something that's pretty new? You had told me before the call you guys are just celebrated your 2 years. What has success been for you? Obviously, this is very unique in the sense of you have brought in your coaching expertise and you're looking at a model that is pretty radical in the best sense of the word. How are you looking? How are you seeing success in the students over at your school?
Yeah, it's a great question, and I think it is. I think to an extent you do have to find outcomes that you can measure.
Yeah,
I mean, for us, it's about falling in love with the process as a staff, as a student body, um, but you can see those outcomes in who you're developing. And so I think for us, a way that we've seen success is 96% retention rate, which is just crazy.
yeah, wow.
Verse, especially in today's, even from a football standpoint, the portal era,
Hmm.
everybody's transferring. There's no commitment anywhere. I think just the amount of applicants, we haven't done advertising from a paid standpoint.
Wow.
We don't want to really be known. Like I don't really do a ton of podcasts for this reason. We've had PR opportunities, and we're just getting, we've had 1,000 applications in the last year, and we're not accepting hardly any students. So right now it's just making sure that the foundation's laid. But I think about a student. Look, I'll think about a student named Jonathan Stanley, and Jonathan Stanley is going to be a junior here at Austin Christian, and Jonathan had broken up with his girlfriend who was also coming to ACU. They get back together. They end up getting married, and Jonathan loves Jesus more than he did before he came here.
Hmm.
He loves his family. He loves his country. But Jonathan has also built a technology, an app that is an incredible tool that companies like Chick-fil-A are using, that he's been sponsored by OpenAI. He's getting major, major funding. He could sell his
Wow.
company for $5+ million right now, and he's a junior.
Wow.
So not only does he love the church, he loves his family. He has an incredible wife who also loves Jesus, but he's creating a technology that will compete against anybody that's in the secular space right now.
Yeah.
And so, but he's kingdom minded, and he wants to sow that back into the kingdom
Wow.
through things that he's passionate about.
Yeah.
So that's a micro example of what's happening across the board at our school.
That's incredible. I'm really interested to get your perspective. So, you're a president of a very successful university and you're seeing all this growth and faithfulness. How do you see your role not only as administrative, right? Because you're running a large organization with a lot of moving pieces, a lot of challenges. But how do you balance that nuance between this need to be highly administrative, but also, I would imagine, this deeply pastoral role that you're playing as coach to so many of these students walking through very formative years of their life?
Yeah, I think it's a great question. I think what's awesome about being young, like I walk into the most presidential roundtable rooms and I'm like the student worker. And they're like, hey, who's the student that made it into the and I'm that guy that's also a president who looks, 21 years old. I'm not 21 by the way, but I just had students in here right before this podcast started. So I think it's going through these experiences of starting something and building something from the ground floor.
Yeah.
Every learning experience, you're going, our students need to know this.
Hmm.
Whenever I meet with somebody from Chick-fil-A about how to build culture, I'm learning that for the first time and it's relevant. It's relevant to the students who also want to start businesses where I'm not 65, 70 years old and I take a lot of things for granted. Like, these are the same thing. I'm not that far removed from our students right now. So you're bringing them along the journey. Like I treat them like a staff member. They have just as much buy-in. It's if they see trash on their way to class, that's not staff's job. We're
Hmm.
training that into the students.
Wow.
And I think that that's kind of that West Point approach
Yeah.
that we've taken. But I think it's everything that I'm learning, I'm sending it back out to the students
Hmm.
immediately. I'm sending text. I'm meeting with them. I'm saying, hey, you should learn about this. I just read about this figure, or I read about this company. Um, so I think it's all it's applicable
Yeah.
immediately to somebody who's building a company at 20 years old.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, and I love the practicality of what you're doing. It seems like there's a high level of collaboration and knowledge sharing in your school, which is incredible. With any higher education institution, there's challenges, and I'm sure you've experienced that. What challenges, not only to you, but as you're looking at the big picture of Christian universities, what challenges are you facing in a cultural climate that is often very skeptical of faith, of Christian education? How are you navigating that, and what are you seeing?
Um, I think that I think that the reason why the secular community oftentimes is skeptical of anything Christian is I think that we have a 99% acceptance rate a lot of times.
Yeah.
We accept everybody. And so what happens is it almost turns into a teen challenge. The culture isn't strong for the core values and core beliefs. And so I think that having clear standards on who we accept and who we keep at our school um, really helps that quality control of the product being the student. And so I think that yeah, there's definitely challenges with higher ed. I think that a lot of the things that are done um, are archaic in a sense. It's like, well, this is the way things have always been done.
Yeah. Yeah.
And I think, like I was saying, with the eyes wide open component is a huge benefit. And I really do. I think that the AI, obviously, there's reason to handle with caution, handle with care, AI and what's happening in the world. But I think it's a great opportunity for Christian schools, which make up almost half of the schools that have closed in the last 5 years since COVID, are Christian schools. And I think that this is a great opportunity for us to incorporate technology and AI into the foundation of the school so that way we don't have the administrative bloat. It's
Yeah.
almost 75% of schools are dishing out all revenue to headcount, 75%. 75% is
Wow.
going to headcount.
Wow.
So that's a great opportunity for us where we need to build a staff that is meeting with students constantly. Like they're constantly pouring into them. And then now we have an AI tool that's doing all of the administrative work for us and we can focus on what really matters. And now from 75% going to headcount, 25% is going to headcount. So
Wow.
we're saving
Yeah.
almost 50% of every dollar from a donor
Wow.
to give back to the student. So I think that some of these challenges that we're seeing in higher ed, I think also there's another side of what's happening in the world, and it's a great opportunity.
Yeah.
I think there's also, let me just say this as well. I think there's also um, with with the gray area, and with, I would also say, with the black and white delineation of what's happening in culture, like it's very clear what the truth is.
Yeah.
It's very clear where we stand and where the world stands. And so I think leaning into that and going, all right, this isn't like we're just sitting in this gray area anymore. This is this is completely anti-gospel,
Hmm.
and I think that's an awesome opportunity.
Absolutely.
It's a great time to be, standing up for your faith, and I think parents and students want to be a part of something like that.
Yeah. Obviously, in the position that you're in, you are constantly in conversations with students. And what are you seeing as some of the biggest spiritual questions that students are wrestling with right now? We obviously, know the moment that we're living in, but from your perspective, what are some of those things they're wrestling with and talking about on your school, and obviously you're speaking around the nation as well? What are you seeing in that respect?
I think that the biggest question is what does the word of God say, honestly? And I think oftentimes we go, well, obviously LGBTQ plus, you have all of these different cultural abortion.
Yeah.
They're not necessarily trying to refute what the word of God says about it.
Mm,
They just want to know, what does the word of God
yeah.
say about this?
Yeah.
And so what they're asking for is, show me the answers. Stop beating around the bush. Stop giving me these hard responses to like kind of read between the lines on. And so I think that whenever we give them that, they're just hungry. They're hungry to know the truth,
Yeah.
and they're tired of fluff. They're tired of just, all up in the air. They're tired of philosophy.
Yeah.
Just give me the fundamental truth of what the Word of God says. So
Yeah. I'm seeing this trend in specifically Christian higher education where a lot of universities that started with a very clear Christian mission and vision deviate from that for a plethora of reasons that are understandable in the sense of sports and enrollment and
mhm.
attractability. How have you stayed grounded in what your Christian mission and vision are without, to your point, watering that down?
Yeah,
But you've been very successful in that, where other schools are having to pivot from that very Christian ethos in order to attain students and become more visible. How are you navigating that as a Christian school?
I think I think that the number one thing about us from day one, like we're pretty focused. Even our degree path, we offer one degree.
Hmm.
We're okay with that.
Yeah.
We're okay with saying no. Um, and so for us, it's criticism is the price of clarity for
Hmm.
us.
That's good.
And so if we're not getting people that are criticizing the things that we're doing, that means that we're not connecting with anybody. So what we're trying to do is we're trying to connect 90% of the way with 10% of the audience. And a lot of times we get that flipped.
Yeah.
So I think also just the connection with the local church. I mean, so many of these schools that we know in the Ivy League started out of local churches.
Wow.
And whenever they lose connection with the church, it starts to be board run. It starts to, you give a little bit on a certain topic, or you give a little bit on something, and the next thing you know, over the course of a couple hundred years, you start to see that drift from the mission. And so that is our commitment, to always staying grounded, and partnered with the local church. It's in our bylaws that we don't lose touch of that. Um, so I think we're okay with criticism, and I think that obviously there's going to be certain challenges that do come up whenever it comes to being partnered with the local church whenever you're trying to grow a university. Um, but we're okay with that
Yeah.
because what's the alternative?
Yeah. Yeah. I'm so encouraged to hear that. There's a theologian and pastor that famously said, we can't be surprised when we send our kids to Caesar and they come back Roman. And so I think there is this dichotomy with parents of wanting to send their kids to Christian education, but in a landscape that seems to be where culture is not just skeptical of faith, but Christian higher education is also skeptical of faith. And so it's really encouraging to hear that there are schools out there that are not just on the cutting edge of technology and business and entrepreneurship, but you're staying rooted in the purpose of why you guys started this. I think that's incredible. You've obviously spoken about this a little bit, but if you could reimagine Christian higher education for the next generation, what would it look like? And I know it would look like Austin Christian University, but on a bigger scale, vision cast for me for a moment.
And that's macro
Yeah,
all higher ed.
yeah,
I think it's a world where um, every classroom that is it's not theology a theology building and then you have a business building. I think all of those things have to be married. This isn't like, hey, okay, now it's time for your theology class, and then you get into business, and it's now we're learning the principles of the world. I think it's where those two things are both excellent. They're taught at the highest level, and we're not compromising on excellence just because we're Christians. I think that we're setting a standard again, and that the work that we're creating shows the beauty of Christ.
yeah,
Like that's so many of the greatest paintings in the world or the greatest art in the world comes out of telling creation stories.
yeah,
And so I think for us, the technologies, the companies, the entrepreneurs that we produce should show the beauty of Christ, and it should have the theology is just it's living through them. It's so in them, but that's not two different classes.
yeah,
And I think this is just the for Christianity as a whole, you want and you love to see people that are creating beautiful products, not just a crap product that has like a fish on next to the name.
yeah,
Like, no, that doesn't show us anything about Christ. Like, he's the greatest leader to ever walk the earth. And our job is to follow the greatest leader, and the greatest followers are the greatest leaders. And so I think about Truett Cathy. I think about David Green. I think about people who have lived to sow back into the next generation. We don't know them because they've made a lot of money. We know them and we celebrate them because their whole life is not to be a seven-figure earner. It's be a seven-figure sower.
yeah. Oh, that's good.
They're constantly sowing. We call those grim reapers.
Hmm.
People that are just constantly reaping and they're never giving back.
Yeah,
So our goal isn't seven-figure earners, seven-figure sowers, and we constantly preach that. And you have to create world-class work in order to be able to give and provide more jobs and provide better education for the next generation and expand churches. So that's what I'm hoping we see is an excellent quality across the board.
yeah. Man, I love that, and it really seems like you have found this model and this vision where, you're creating leaders of moral clarity and courage, but you have found a way to really fulfill, not to be too Christianese, but to fulfill the Great Commission in such a way where you are building leaders that are sowing. And they're making an impact in really practical ways. They don't walk away with all this theory and philosophy, but they're really effectuating change in their communities, in their sphere of influence, and that's a noble cause. How can people learn more about the school and get involved? We have a large network of church leaders and people that are always looking for ways to support ministries like this. How can people learn more about what you're doing and how can they get more involved?
Yeah, I would love to get connected with anybody that's, on your platform. AustinChristianU.org is our website. Would love for y'all to check that out. You can follow me on Instagram, Connor, Connor champion, on Instagram, and reach out. Um, but the best way is probably through the website or on social media. But yeah, give us a follow. Also, reach out to me. My email would be president@austinchristianu.org, and would love to be in touch with anybody who's passionate about this.
That's awesome. Well, I love what you're doing, and would love to support all that God is doing in this ministry. Conversations like this remind me that Christian higher education is not just about the classroom. It's not just about degrees. This is literally shaping lives for eternity. And what I love about your vision for ACU is it highlights what's possible when faith and learning walk hand in hand. And so, if you're a student, if you're a parent, you're a donor, you're a church leader, or simply someone who just cares about the future of the church, I hope that this inspires you to see higher education as more than just information. It's formation. And man, the next generation does not need just more answers. They need leaders who are going to walk with them in both truth and grace. So appreciate this conversation. Thanks for listening to Clarity in Controversy. Until next time, as always, keep asking the big questions and keep pursuing the kind of faith that shapes not only your future, but the world around you. You can watch the full episode and more from Clarity in Controversy by going to theamericancouncil.com or texting Clarity to 96341. I'm Tanner DeBella, and this is Clarity in Controversy.